What would you do if the people you trusted walked out on you mid-crisis in the most public setting imaginable? Imagine standing in a courtroom in London's High Court, a place steeped in centuries of tradition where decorum is law and silence is golden. Now imagine that same courtroom exploding into tension as the very team you depended on, the legal experts hired to protect your interests, abruptly rises and leaves, leaving you exposed. That was the scene the world witnessed as Prince Harry took the stand. A prince known for his charm, his public vulnerability, and his occasional fiery outbursts, now transformed before everyone's eyes into something else entirely, fury incarnate. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story begins with a trial that has gripped Britain and much of the world. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, filing suit against the publisher of the Daily Mail and its sister newspaper, the Mail on Sunday. At the heart of this legal battle is a serious accusation that journalists engaged in or commissioned unlawful activities to uncover private details about the Duke and his family. Details that were then published in stories spanning decades, stories that Harry claims violated his right to privacy, stories that caused irreparable damage to both him and those he loves. The publisher has fiercely denied these allegations, calling them preposterous and without foundation, insisting that the articles in question were the product of responsible journalism based on legitimate sources. They argue that many of these stories are more than 20 years old and notably were never the subject of a complaint at the time. This is not just a legal squabble, it is a clash of values, principles, and reputations played out under the unforgiving glare of global media. From the very moment Harry entered the courtroom, there was a palpable sense of tension. You could feel it in the air. Cameras clicked relentlessly, journalists jostled for position, and the quiet murmurs of spectators turned into a low hum of anticipation. This was not just another royal appearance. This was a king in waiting, standing up for what he claims is right, challenging a powerful media institution and placing himself under extraordinary scrutiny. And then, as if the tension weren't enough, the first shockwave hit. Harry's legal team, his trusted advisors, began gathering their papers and walking toward the door. Why would seasoned lawyers abandon a client mid-trial? Was it a disagreement on strategy, a reaction to evidence, or something far more personal? The speculation ran wild in real time, both inside and outside the courtroom. Observers noted Harry's reaction, a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and barely contained anger. For a man accustomed to navigating public scrutiny and personal attacks, this was uncharted territory, and yet he remained on the stand. Alone, at least in practical terms, facing both a formidable media entity and a courtroom full of eyes waiting for any sign of weakness. The Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday have a long history of investigative reporting, often towing the line between public interest and intrusion. Harry's accusations, however, challenged the very boundaries of press freedom. He claims that what was done to him crossed into illegality, that the pursuit of stories about his private life was not just aggressive reporting, but unlawful surveillance. The publisher's preemptive statement framed the allegations as baseless, insisting that all reporting adhered to the standards of responsible journalism. And yet, the courtroom atmosphere suggested that this was far more than a legal debate. It was a confrontation of narratives. On one side, a prince who has repeatedly tried to reclaim his privacy and protect his family. On the other, a media conglomerate defending its methods, its past, and its reputation. From a historical perspective, this trial is extraordinary. The British press has long had a complicated relationship with the royal family. Intrusion, sensationalism, and scandal have peppered headlines for decades, but rarely has a member of the royal family taken such direct legal action, while so personally involved. The stakes are astronomical, both financially and symbolically. Every word, every reaction, every gesture is being dissected. And in this environment, the sudden walkout of Harry's legal team amplified the drama to almost unbearable levels. It raised questions about loyalty, strategy, and the very nature of justice when power, privilege, and media influence collide. Yet, even before this courtroom storm, the story had layers of intrigue and emotion. Harry's legal battle is not just about newspapers, it is about identity, control, and personal agency. For years, he has been thrust into the glare of public attention, his life documented, analyzed, and often distorted. He has endured personal tragedies, public scrutiny, and relentless media pressure. The idea that journalists may have used unlawful means to gather information is deeply personal. It is not merely about legal technicalities. It is about dignity, autonomy, and the right to protect one's family. And as he took the stand, one could see the weight of decades of intrusion reflected in his demeanor. The courtroom was more than a legal arena. It was a stage where a man's struggle for privacy, respect, and justice was laid bare for all to see. Audience engagement here is critical. Ask yourself, would you have remained composed if those you trusted most abandoned you at the very moment you needed them? Would the world's gaze, unblinking and merciless, intensify your emotions, or would it force you into silence? This is the question millions are asking as they follow the trial. And the answers are neither simple nor comforting. Because Harry's reaction, while shocking to some, is a human response to extreme circumstances. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and vulnerability. Meanwhile, the media narrative outside the courtroom escalated even faster than the proceedings inside. Every major news outlet, every social media platform dissected the moment of the legal team's exit. Opinions flooded in, some sympathetic, some critical, some gleefully speculative. The Duke of Sussex was no longer just a participant in a legal case. He had become a symbol in a broader debate about the role of the press, the rights of public figures, and the responsibilities of those who wield influence over information. What makes this story even more gripping is the tension between past and present. The articles in question, some decades old, reflect a time when complaints were not filed and standards of reporting were different, or at least claimed to be. Yet, the present court proceedings force a re-evaluation of those past actions under modern scrutiny and legal interpretation. Harry is challenging not just individual stories, but the ethics of decades-long journalistic practice. And as the trial unfolds, the implications reach far beyond one man or one media company. They touch on questions about freedom, accountability, and the boundaries of private life in an age of constant public exposure. But as we explore this tale, one thing becomes clear. The drama is only beginning. Harry's courtroom outburst, the abandonment by his legal team, and the intensity of the accusations have created a narrative that will not settle quietly. There are secrets yet to be revealed, tensions yet to be explored, and evidence that could turn the story upside down. And while the world watches, questions continue to multiply. What caused the legal team to walk out? What evidence triggered Harry's reaction? How will this trial redefine his relationship with the media, and perhaps even with his own family? The courtroom is a crucible, and Prince Harry is at its center. He is facing scrutiny, legal maneuvering, and personal betrayal all at once. Every moment matters. Every expression is examined. Every word could become a headline, and in this high-stakes environment, emotions flare, strategies shift, and the unexpected can and does happen. For the viewer, this is more than a story about a trial. It is a window into human behavior under extraordinary pressure, a lesson in resilience, and a drama that feels closer to theater than the rigid procedures of a courtroom. As the trial continues, the stakes escalate. The world is waiting for the next move, the next revelation, the next explosive moment. And the opening scene, the legal team walking out, Harry's fury on full display, is only the tip of the iceberg. Behind closed doors, secrets linger. In the public eye, speculation grows. And in the courtroom, the battle for privacy, reputation, and justice rages on. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it feel like to be under the gaze of the world, to stand alone in a room where every movement, every expression, every word is scrutinized? For Prince Harry, that was the reality on the morning the courtroom erupted. The moment he stepped over the threshold of London's High Court, it was clear this would not be a normal day. Journalists had already staked out positions, cameras clicked in rapid succession, and whispers of speculation filled the air like static electricity charged with anticipation. No one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone felt that something monumental was about to unfold. Harry took his place at the witness stand, a figure both composed and tense, a man used to public attention yet unprepared for the personal intensity of this trial. The judge, poised and measured, called the court to order. The air seemed to thicken as he adjusted the microphone, ready to give his evidence. And then it began, the recounting of decades of alleged intrusion by the Daily Mail. From the start, Harry's voice carried the weight of personal history. He spoke of private moments exploited, of personal grief made into headlines, of information allegedly obtained through unlawful means. Each sentence seemed to resonate beyond the walls of the courtroom, touching on the universal tension between privacy and public curiosity. His emotions flickered, anger, hurt, disbelief, but he maintained a controlled cadence, carefully choosing each word. Yet, the calm was deceptive. Subtle signs of tension began to emerge. His fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the stand, eyes darting occasionally to the rows behind him. The legal team seated nearby, normally the anchor in such high-pressure scenarios, began a quiet, almost imperceptible shifting of papers. Observers might have missed it at first, but the shift became more pronounced, more deliberate, a hushed conversation in the corner. paper stacking, rising, walking toward the door, and then it happened. In one synchronized motion, the legal team rose and began exiting the courtroom. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Cameras caught the moment from every angle. Harry's expression froze. The air around him seemed to hum with disbelief, and spectators leaned forward, collectively holding their breath. Why would the people entrusted with guiding a prince through the labyrinth of law abandon him mid-trial? Some speculated it was strategic, others feared conflict within the legal team. But the scene was nothing short of cinematic. The Duke of Sussex remained on the stand, a man isolated by circumstance, yet undeterred. His reaction was visible to all. A tight jaw, narrowed eyes, and a barely contained flare of frustration. The courtroom, typically a place of rigid procedure, seemed suddenly unpredictable. And the world outside would later replay these images thousands of times, each viewer trying to decipher the mix of human emotion and royal expectation. The tension was compounded by the weight of Harry's accusations. He claimed that journalists had crossed legal boundaries in their pursuit of stories about him and his family. The publisher, of course, countered that the allegations were unfounded, that journalism had been conducted responsibly and ethically. But Harry's testimony framed these stories not as trivial tabloid sensationalism, but as violations of personal sovereignty, moments of intrusion that had a lasting emotional impact. Every anecdote he shared, from unauthorized photographs to stories published without consent, was charged with both legal significance and human vulnerability. As the legal team disappeared down the hallway, murmurs swept through the room. Observers speculated about internal conflicts, ethical dilemmas, and strategy misfires. Could it have been a protest against the handling of evidence, a disagreement on how to confront the publisher? Or was it something far more personal, a clash of principle within a team sworn to represent one man's interests? Every observer had a theory, and every theory only heightened the drama. Harry's demeanor, however, remained intense. He was no longer just a prince. He was a man confronting decades of personal violation, standing against a media powerhouse with only the authority of his own presence. The energy in the room was palpable, almost electric, as reporters and spectators absorbed the unprecedented scene. Every camera lens seemed to magnify the tension, every whispered speculation fueling the narrative. And yet, amidst the chaos, Harry continued. He recounted his experiences with clarity, sometimes faltering under the weight of emotion, but never surrendering. There was an irony in the moment. A prince, accustomed to the spotlight, now had it turned into a crucible of scrutiny and vulnerability. The very tools used to shield or propel him in the public eye, the legal team, the advisors, the procedural safeguards had, in a flash, become absent. He was exposed, unshielded, and intensely human. Audience questions began to form almost organically. How does someone maintain composure when betrayal feels immediate and public? What drives a person to confront decades of alleged intrusion under such intense observation? Could Harry have predicted this moment? Or did it emerge purely from the unpredictability of human behavior and legal drama? The answers were not simple, and they were certainly not comforting. The publisher's stance added another layer to the tension. They maintained that their reporting adhered to journalistic standards, highlighting that the stories in question were long-standing and previously unchallenged. But the courtroom was not just a forum for technical legal debate. It was a theater of emotion and public perception. Every statement, every pause, every gesture was loaded with meaning. Harry's accusations directly challenged the integrity of decades of journalism, and in doing so, they forced the world to reconsider the boundaries of reporting, privacy, and accountability. This is where the narrative tension deepens. The courtroom was not merely a legal arena. It was a stage for a larger story about power, privilege, and the right to personal space in a world that rarely allows it. Harry's emotional state, already under pressure, became a lens through which viewers could explore the clash between individual rights and institutional authority. His fury, frustration, and resolve painted a portrait of a man pushed to the edge, navigating a system designed to test every aspect of his resilience. And yet, there was more. The exit of the legal team was not just a dramatic flourish. It was a signal that this trial would not follow the expected script, a signal that even the best-laid plans could unravel under the strain of human emotion and high stakes. And as Harry continued to give evidence, each word was charged with the weight of what had just occurred. The courtroom, once predictable and orderly, now felt volatile, as if at any moment the next twist could upend everything. Observers outside the courtroom quickly picked up on the drama. Social media erupted with speculation, memes, and hot takes. Headlines appeared in real time. Prince Harry left alone in court. Legal team walks out mid-trial, fury in the High Court, Duke versus Daily Mail. The narrative had shifted from procedural legality to raw human drama, with Harry at the center of a storm that seemed almost too intense for reality. But the stakes were not just about perception. The allegations themselves were serious. If Harry's claims were proven, they could redefine the standards of journalistic behavior, privacy rights, and accountability in media practices. Conversely, if the publisher's defenses held, it would affirm decades of reporting as beyond reproach, a vindication of media freedom. Every moment in that courtroom, every pause, every emotional spike, carried consequences far beyond the immediate scene. And through it all, Harry remained. A man alone in a moment that could have crushed someone less resolute. His testimony continued, weaving a narrative that combined the legal, the personal, and the symbolic. He described invasions of privacy, emotional distress, and the constant tension of living life under scrutiny. And in doing so, he gave the world not just a glimpse of a legal battle, but an intimate portrait of vulnerability, resilience, and raw human emotion. The legal team's exit had been the spark, but it was Harry's response that was the fire. And as he concluded that part of his testimony, the room held its collective breath, waiting for the next move, the next revelation, the next unexpected twist. Every eye was on him, every camera lens fixed, every whisper amplified into speculation. And yet, despite the drama, one question lingered in everyone's mind. What had caused the legal team to walk out? Was it an internal disagreement, a strategic calculation, or something else entirely hidden behind the closed doors of the court? The answer, no one knew. Yet. And the suspense hung in the air, thick and electric, promising that what came next would be even more explosive. Because in this courtroom, nothing is predictable, nothing is safe. And every revelation, every emotional beat, every gesture carries weight far beyond the moment. The stage is set for a trial that is as much about human emotion and public perception as it is about law. And the next chapter, the next moment in this unfolding drama, would push the stakes even higher. But what came next would shatter expectations, and no one, not the prince, not the legal team, not the media, could have seen it coming. What happens when a prince, accustomed to the glare of cameras and the weight of expectation, publicly accuses a media empire of unlawful conduct? How do the very institutions tasked with holding power accountable respond when the target is royalty itself? These questions were no longer hypothetical, as Prince Harry stood on the witness stand, the courtroom hanging on every word. The air was thick with tension, each syllable heavy with implication, and the very foundations of British tabloid journalism seemed poised to tremble under the force of his accusations. Harry's claim was audacious, daring, and unprecedented in scope. He alleged that the Daily Mail and its sister newspaper, the Mail on Sunday, had engaged in or commissioned unlawful activities to obtain private information about him and his family. Not trivial gossip, not harmless tabloid blunders, but deliberate actions aimed at invading personal lives, capturing secrets, and exploiting them for publication. The notion of such misconduct, leveled against one of the largest media outlets in the United Kingdom, sent shockwaves through the press, the palace, and the public alike. The details Harry presented were both meticulous and startling. He recounted specific incidents where information, sensitive, deeply personal, sometimes traumatic, had been published in ways he claimed were not only invasive but illegal. He described unauthorized surveillance, contacts who were allegedly approached without consent, and data obtained through means that skirted legality. Each example was layered with emotional resonance, painting a picture of a life scrutinized, dissected, and laid bare, without permission. And the press, of course, did not take these accusations lightly. The Daily Mail issued an immediate rebuttal, calling Harry's claims preposterous and without foundation. They insisted that their journalists had not engaged in unlawful conduct and that their reporting relied on legitimate sources. They argued that many of the stories cited were decades old, some 20 years or more, and that at no point had they faced complaints regarding these publications. From their perspective, this was responsible journalism under scrutiny from a plaintiff seeking personal redress. Yet the tension in the courtroom suggested a different reality. Harry's delivery was neither casual nor performative. It carried the weight of personal trauma, history, and the burden of being constantly observed. Every pause, every glance toward the empty seat once occupied by his legal team, every tightening of his jaw signaled a man both aware of the stakes and pushed to the edge. And the courtroom itself, usually a place of procedural calm, seemed to vibrate with the unspoken electricity of an impending storm. Observers quickly recognized that Harry's case was about more than individual grievances. At its core, it questioned the balance between press freedom and personal privacy, the accountability of media institutions, and the ethics of reporting on public figures whose private lives were exploited for commercial gain. In accusing a major newspaper of unlawful behavior, Harry was challenging the very notion of media impunity in the United Kingdom. He was asserting that fame and title did not make one fair game for intrusion, and that decades-old stories could still carry consequences when obtained through unethical means. This was not just a legal challenge, it was a public spectacle. As Harry's testimony unfolded, the gallery of journalists, spectators, and court officials leaned in, captivated by the narrative. Questions naturally arose. If these actions were indeed unlawful, how many others had been subjected to similar invasions? Were these practices systemic within the press? And if so, could one man's courage, one prince's willingness to confront power, trigger a reckoning for decades of unchecked behavior? The emotional stakes were high. Harry did not just speak as a plaintiff. He spoke as a son, a brother, and a father. He illustrated the personal impact of media intrusion, detailing the stress, the anxiety, and the sense of violation that accompanies being constantly monitored and publicly dissected. It was a human story as much as it was a legal one, and it struck a chord with the public watching from afar. The prince's experience became a lens through which people considered their own encounters with privacy violations in the digital age. The courtroom drama intensified as Harry's legal team had left. Without their immediate support, the Duke's words carried an added weight, the isolation amplifying the impact of every sentence. The defense, on the other hand, maintained a calm, calculated presence prepared to counter his claims point by point. Their approach highlighted the contrast between institutional steadiness and personal passion, between procedural defense and lived experience. The tension between these forces created a charged atmosphere, one in which every word uttered could shift the narrative and influence public perception. Questions about journalistic ethics began to dominate discussions outside the courtroom. Was it ever acceptable to obtain information through questionable means in the pursuit of a story? Did the passage of time mitigate potential misconduct? And, critically, how should the media respond when the subject of reporting is not just any public figure, but a member of the royal family? These were not merely academic debates. They were central to understanding the implications of Harry's accusations. The media's response to the trial was, unsurprisingly, intense. Headlines appeared in real time. Prince Harry accuses Daily Mail of illegal intrusion. Royal versus press, a courtroom showdown. Decades of tabloid coverage challenged by Duke of Sussex. Social media erupted with commentary both supportive and skeptical, as millions speculated about the truth behind Harry's claims. The narrative became a battleground of perception, where facts, emotions, and biases collided in unpredictable ways. Within the courtroom, every detail mattered. Harry's recounting of events was precise, intended to substantiate his claims and establish a pattern of misconduct. He described the methods allegedly employed by journalists, from persistent inquiries into private matters to suspicious sources appearing at inopportune moments. Each example reinforced the central argument, that there had been a sustained effort to gather information without regard for legality or ethics. Yet contradictions surfaced as well. The publisher insisted on the legitimacy of their reporting and highlighted the lack of contemporaneous complaints. Critics questioned the timing of the lawsuit, suggesting that many of the incidents occurred decades ago and that the media's methods were consistent with standard journalistic practice of the time. These counterpoints added layers of complexity, creating a narrative where truth, perception, and legal interpretation intertwined in a tense, high-stakes dance. Harry's strategy was both bold and vulnerable. By bringing his personal experiences to the forefront, he humanized a legal dispute that could easily have been reduced to technicalities and procedural arguments. His testimony was not just about evidence. It was about impact, about the human cost of intrusive reporting, about the erosion of personal space and trust. It forced the courtroom, the public, and the media to consider questions that transcend legal frameworks. What is the moral responsibility of journalists? Where is the line between public interest and private harm? And can even the most powerful institutions be held accountable when those boundaries are crossed? The tension escalated as new evidence was introduced. Documents, emails, and historical records were presented, each adding a layer of nuance to the story. The courtroom became a stage for revelation, where past actions were scrutinized under the lens of present accountability. Each piece of evidence raised further questions. Was this truly unlawful? Was it unethical? And, perhaps most provocatively, how much of the story remained hidden, unreported, or intentionally obscured? Observers were left grappling with conflicting narratives. Harry's personal account suggested a pattern of intrusion and disregard for privacy, while the publisher's defense emphasized legality, precedent, and journalistic freedom. The dichotomy created an almost cinematic tension, a story where hero and institution clashed, and where the audience had to navigate between empathy for the individual and respect for systemic authority. And yet, the trial was far from over. The walkout of Harry's legal team had been a dramatic moment, but it was also a signal. The courtroom was now a place of heightened unpredictability. Every statement, every reaction, every piece of evidence could trigger the next revelation, the next shock, the next emotional surge. It was clear that the days ahead would be as volatile as they were consequential, that the truth, whatever it might be, was buried somewhere between decades of reporting and the lived experiences of those whose lives had been exposed. As the first day of testimony drew to a close, one question loomed larger than any other. What would the next wave of revelations bring? Would it confirm Harry's claims, vindicate the press, or uncover truths no one had anticipated? The courtroom had already seen anger, shock, and unexpected exits. And if the initial events were any indication, the drama was only beginning. Because in this case, the stakes are higher than fame, higher than legacy, higher even than public opinion. They touch on something fundamental: the right to privacy, the integrity of institutions, and the courage required to confront power head-on. And as the world waits for the next hearing, the tension remains thick and almost tangible, promising that what comes next will be nothing short of explosive. But what came next would challenge not only Harry's patience, but the very narrative the public thought they understood, and no one could have predicted the twists that were about to unfold. What do you do when the institution you've spent decades confronting fires back with words that sting as sharply as any public criticism? For Prince Harry, the courtroom was no longer just a platform to air grievances. It had become a battleground, and the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday were firing volleys of deflection, denial, and pointed rebuttals. Their official statement before the trial had been clear. The accusations are preposterous and without foundation. Strong words, loaded with implication, and they signaled a media empire determined not to yield an inch. From the very first moments of cross-examination, the courtroom felt electric. The publisher's legal representatives moved with the precision of seasoned strategists, presenting documentation, witness statements, and counter-arguments designed to challenge every assertion Harry made. Their approach was methodical, almost surgical, slicing through emotion with a calm, almost clinical detachment. The contrast was stark. A prince who had lived under constant intrusion, sharing personal experiences with raw emotion, versus a media conglomerate presenting decades of reporting. From the outside, the royal family is a carefully curated image, composed, poised, and impervious. But behind palace walls, there are layers of expectation, hierarchy, and intense scrutiny. Every move is measured not only in terms of personal consequences, but also in its impact on the monarchy as an institution. Harry's decision to sue the Daily Mail wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a challenge to a system that prizes discretion and public perception above all else. And while the courtroom drama played out publicly, the palace was undoubtedly watching closely, assessing strategy, optics, and loyalty. Insiders later suggested that the royal household had been quietly monitoring the trial from the start. Advisors and aides tracked every word, every expression, every moment of tension. Some saw Harry's actions as a necessary stand for personal dignity, others as a breach of protocol with potential reputational risk. The balance between supporting a family member and protecting an institution is delicate, often invisible to the public. In Harry's case, that balance was being tested in the most public of arenas. The stakes were deeply personal. Harry's testimony was more than legal, it was a reckoning. He spoke of decades of intrusion into private moments, of grief and family struggles that had been sensationalized for headlines. Each story recalled in court wasn't just a legal claim, it was a memory, an emotional wound reopened under the harsh light of public attention. And as he recounted these experiences, the absence of his legal team amplified the sense of isolation, forcing him to confront both media power and the weight of familial expectation without immediate counsel. Palace pressure is subtle yet profound. It isn't always directives or commands. Often it comes as quiet counsel, implicit expectations, or reminders of tradition. Royals learn early that personal desires are sometimes secondary to the institution's stability. For Harry, taking this trial public meant navigating the complex interplay of personal conviction and familial duty. Each statement, each accusation carried implications not just for him, but for how the monarchy would be perceived in a media-saturated, opinion-driven world. And then there's the irony. Harry, whose life had been shaped by public fascination and media attention, was now taking a stand against the very forces that had defined much of his experience. The media coverage had been relentless for decades, yet now the courtroom became a venue for reclaiming narrative control. The palace, aware of the high stakes, would be monitoring reactions, prepared to intervene indirectly if necessary to protect institutional interests. Every word he spoke was likely evaluated not only for its legal merit but for its impact on the monarchy's image. The interplay between palace oversight and personal agency became particularly evident when discussing the timing of the lawsuit. Some advisors reportedly questioned whether this legal action might exacerbate media scrutiny or inflame public opinion. Others understood that Harry's pursuit of privacy was unavoidable. He had long tried private channels to resolve grievances with limited success. The trial, then, represented both a point of no return and a calculated risk, a chance to confront decades of intrusion and reclaim autonomy over his life story. The courtroom itself became a proxy for these hidden pressures. Every glance toward the empty seat of his legal team could be read as a subtle reminder that Harry was navigating not only a legal system, but also a network of expectations, traditions, and pressures from multiple fronts. The publisher's methodical denials were one challenge, but the invisible weight of palace scrutiny was another equally formidable opponent. Harry's testimony illuminated a deep conflict between personal truth and institutional loyalty. He described moments when he felt constrained by public expectation, moments when decisions were dictated more by perception than principle. These reflections revealed the personal cost of life within a system that prioritizes image over emotional reality. And for viewers, the story became as much about the human struggle of a man trying to live authentically as it was about media ethics or legal procedure. Audience engagement emerges naturally here. Have you ever faced pressure from an institution or group whose reputation you were supposed to protect, even at personal cost? How would you act if personal boundaries collided with centuries of tradition? Harry's story resonates because it magnifies this universal struggle on a global scale under the most intense scrutiny imaginable. The trial also shone light on a broader tension, the role of privacy in a modern media-driven world. Royals have long been under scrutiny, their lives documented, analyzed, and dissected, often without consent. Harry's legal action questioned the moral and ethical responsibilities of institutions that report on private lives, asking whether fame justifies intrusion and whether legal compliance is enough to excuse emotional harm. The palace, by necessity, had to navigate this delicate balance, supporting a family member while maintaining an image of impartial stability. And then there's the emotional dimension. Harry spoke openly about the personal impact of constant exposure, stress, anxiety, and the sense of being hunted for stories about himself and his family. These were not abstract concepts. They were lived experiences punctuated by moments of grief and frustration. His testimony humanized the struggle, revealing that even a prince is vulnerable when confronted with relentless scrutiny and institutional inertia. The public, too, became a participant in this unfolding drama. Social media platforms buzzed with speculation, opinion, and debate. Was Harry justified in bringing the case forward? Were the publishers defending legitimate practices or shielding unethical behavior? How much influence did the palace have behind the scenes, and how did this affect the perception of justice? These questions kept the story alive, extending its reach far beyond the confines of the courtroom. And yet, even amidst all this scrutiny, one truth remained clear. The stakes were extraordinarily high. The trial was about legality, yes, but also morality, loyalty, and the right to personal autonomy. It was a collision between centuries of royal tradition and modern media practices, between private grief and public spectacle. Each revelation, each emotional moment, carried implications that extended far beyond the walls of the court. As the day progressed, whispers of internal palace discussions filtered into the narrative. Advisors were reportedly debating how to manage public perception, weighing the benefits of discretion against the risk of seeming unsupportive. These behind-the-scenes pressures added another layer to an already complex situation. Harry's decisions were no longer his alone. They resonated through a network of relationships, expectations, and obligations, all magnified by the eyes of the world. The combination of legal strategy, personal testimony, and palace oversight created a tension that was almost unbearable. Every word Harry spoke was scrutinized for legal significance, ethical implication, and public resonance. His anger, his frustration, his moments of vulnerability were magnified by the presence of cameras, the absence of his legal team, and the implicit weight of centuries-old expectations. It was a storm in the making, with no clear resolution in sight. And then came the subtle but unmistakable sense that the trial would reveal more than anyone anticipated. Documents hinted at internal communications, emails suggested decisions made behind closed doors, and the publisher's rebuttals hinted at strategies that had long been hidden from public view. The courtroom, already charged with emotion, became a crucible where power, expectation, and truth intersected in unpredictable ways. For the audience, the implications were staggering. How much influence does a royal institution exert behind the scenes? How do decades of media scrutiny impact personal agency and mental health? And how does one balance the desire for justice against the obligations imposed by tradition and public image? Harry's journey was forcing these questions into the open, challenging assumptions and provoking debate on every level. But just when it seemed the interplay between palace influence and personal testimony had reached its peak, a new element emerged, a whisper of evidence, previously unconsidered, that suggested the stakes were even higher than anyone realized. A confidential memo, referenced but not yet revealed, hinted at decisions and discussions that could alter not only public perception, but the very trajectory of the trial itself. What was in that memo? Who authored it? And how would its revelation affect Harry, the palace, and the media empire he was confronting? The courtroom, already a stage of drama and tension, was poised on the edge of an even more explosive chapter, one that promised to shift the narrative in ways no one, not even the prince himself, could have predicted. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the story was only beginning to reveal the depths of palace intrigue, personal stakes, and the seismic consequences of standing up against decades of scrutiny. But what came next would bring the courtroom to a new level of intensity, forcing everyone to confront the raw intersections of power, loyalty, and human emotion. And no one saw the coming confrontation between the legal team and Harry that would redefine the trial entirely. Have you ever been left standing alone in a room when everyone you trusted abruptly walks away? That was the reality for Prince Harry in London's High Court, a reality no one could have predicted, but everyone in that courtroom would remember forever. The moment his legal team, the very people hired to navigate decades of media scrutiny and legal complexity, rose from their seats and left mid-trial, it was more than a procedural hiccup. It was a shockwave that reverberated through every corner of the courtroom and across the world. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. The Duke was mid-sentence, describing a series of alleged intrusions by the Daily Mail when, in the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. Papers shuffled, chairs creaked, lawyers whispered to one another, eyes darting back and forth. At first, observers assumed routine activity, reviewing documents, organizing notes. But then the pattern became unmistakable. One by one, they began to rise, gathering folders and files with deliberate care. A ripple spread through the room. What was happening? Was this planned? Was this strategic? The first shock hit Harry. A subtle flicker of disbelief crossed his face, followed by visible tension. He paused mid-testimony, glancing toward the emptying seats, questioning silently why those he depended on were abandoning him in a moment that demanded every ounce of support. The courtroom, already charged with anticipation, went still. Every camera lens, every journalist's notebook, every whisper in the gallery seemed to freeze as the realization sank in. Harry was now effectively on his own. The legal team's walkout sent immediate ripples through the public narrative. Reporters outside the courtroom raced to capture the scene, framing headlines that would dominate social media within minutes. Prince Harry left alone in High Court, lawyers abandon royal client mid-trial, shock in courtroom as Duke faces media empire solo. Across the globe, viewers were riveted. Some expressed sympathy, some criticized Harry's predicament, and others questioned the professionalism and loyalty of the departing team. The optics were explosive, and no statement or clarification could undo the initial impact. But why did the walkout happen? The truth was layered, complex, and murky. Some insiders speculated internal disagreement over legal strategy. Perhaps the lawyers felt Harry was pursuing a line of testimony that could jeopardize the case or expose vulnerabilities. Others suggested that there were conflicts of principle, ethical dilemmas, or disputes about how far to push allegations against a media institution so entrenched and powerful. Yet another theory proposed that the sudden exit was a tactical move, leaving Harry alone to elicit a more candid, unguarded testimony that could strengthen the case in the long term. The courtroom and the world watching had no definitive answer. For Harry, the emotional impact was immediate and intense. A man already navigating decades of public scrutiny was now forced to confront one of his most significant challenges without his professional anchor. He could no longer rely on whispered guidance, careful prompts, or discreet corrections. Every statement, every anecdote, every nuance fell solely on him to deliver accurately and persuasively. In that moment, he was stripped to the raw core of the human experience, exposed, vulnerable, and entirely alone. Observers noticed the subtle physical manifestations of this tension. His shoulders stiffened, hands tightened around the edge of the stand, eyebrows furrowed as he grappled with the enormity of being both plaintiff and sole voice in a legal maelstrom. It was a scene of human drama that transcended legal procedure, a prince facing isolation, betrayal, and high stakes all at once. The walkout transformed the trial from a legal proceeding into a high-stakes psychological crucible. Meanwhile, the media publishers' representatives capitalized on the moment. They maintained a composed, almost clinical posture, highlighting the contrast between Harry's emotional exposure and their methodical defense. Their calmness, while legally appropriate, amplified the tension, casting the Duke as a figure confronting not just an institution, but a disciplined, coordinated opposition. Every move was magnified by perception, every reaction scrutinized in real time by the world's press. Inside the courtroom, whispers spread among spectators and journalists alike. The air was thick with speculation and anticipation. Was this a tactical disagreement that had spiraled out of control? Or did it reveal deeper fissures in Harry's support structure, cracks in what had previously seemed an impenetrable shield of legal counsel? The moment was unprecedented, and the uncertainty heightened the drama exponentially. And then came the emotional weight of realization. Harry's testimony, already intense, now carried the added burden of isolation. Without his legal team, he had to balance the dual roles of witness and self-advocate. He was forced to navigate cross-examination, counter-arguments, and evidentiary challenges alone. The Duke's resilience was tested as never before. Every statement became more than just testimony. It became a performance of composure, credibility, and conviction under extraordinary pressure. The emotional contrast could not have been starker. On one side, a man driven by personal history, grief, and indignation, recounting decades of intrusion with emotion-laden precision. On the other, a team of professional legal representatives, now absent, leaving only procedural structure and institutional defense to stand against him. The absence of guidance amplified every misstep, every hesitation, every vulnerable moment. And for viewers, it created an almost unbearable tension. Would Harry maintain composure, or would the pressure finally crack the surface of his resolve? Adding to the complexity was the knowledge that this trial was not just about legal precedent. It was about personal dignity, privacy, and the variability of an individual, even a royal, to assert control over their own narrative. Harry's accusations challenged the boundaries of press freedom, questioned decades of media behavior, and thrust the private consequences of public reporting into the spotlight. The walkout intensified the stakes, forcing both the court and the public to confront the interplay of power, vulnerability, and accountability. The courtroom's atmosphere became electric, almost volatile. Every observer recognized that the walkout was more than a dramatic moment. It was a turning point. It reframed the trial, altering expectations, shifting narrative control, and amplifying the emotional resonance of Harry's testimony. Questions began circulating. How would the Duke respond? Could he continue effectively without counsel? Would the absence of legal guidance affect the trajectory of the case, or would it reveal a deeper layer of courage and personal agency? Even the publisher's team, confident in their preparation, could not ignore the psychological impact of the moment. A plaintiff delivering testimony alone, fueled by emotion and facing decades of alleged wrongdoing, represented a new dynamic. Every cross-examination required careful navigation. Every rebuttal risked inflaming the situation further. And the world watched. Every camera captured nuances, every observer interpreted intention and expression, and every word carried the potential to become the next viral headline. As the day wore on, Harry adapted. He shifted tactics subtly, finding ways to remain articulate, measured, and persuasive, even in the absence of immediate counsel. Each segment of testimony became both a legal declaration and an emotional performance, demonstrating resilience in the face of abandonment. Observers noted his ability to maintain focus even as the pressure escalated, highlighting both the human and symbolic significance of his presence in court. Yet tension continued to mount. The walkout had created a new layer of uncertainty. What had prompted the sudden departure? Were there unresolved disagreements within the legal strategy? Had sensitive information been introduced that required a reevaluation of approach? Or was it a calculated maneuver designed to test the Duke's composure and expose vulnerabilities that might not have been apparent in a more structured environment? The courtroom and the world had no answers, only speculation, tension, and anticipation. Audience engagement emerges naturally here. Imagine being in Harry's position, isolated, scrutinized, and expected to perform flawlessly under global observation. What would you do? Would fear take over, or would determination guide your actions? Could you remain composed while the very people you relied on for guidance and support walked away at a moment of critical importance? These questions resonated far beyond the courtroom, inviting viewers to reflect on trust, loyalty, and the pressures of high-stakes conflict. And just when it seemed that the tension could not increase, a new development entered the narrative. Evidence that had previously been withheld was presented. Documents and communications that suggested deeper layers of both internal disagreement and external pressure. The courtroom, already charged with emotion, now faced the prospect of unraveling long-held assumptions. Harry, though alone in the immediate sense, was at the center of a storm that blended legal complexity, emotional intensity, and global scrutiny. The walkout, while dramatic in itself, was only the beginning. It had shifted the dynamics of the trial, intensified the stakes, and set the stage for revelations that would test the limits of human resilience and institutional accountability. Every observer knew that the next moments would define not only the trajectory of the trial, but the very perception of the Duke of Sussex as a figure confronting power, betrayal, and the pursuit of justice. And yet, the most explosive moments were still to come. Documents, testimonies, and behind-the-scenes negotiations hinted at truths that could alter public understanding and challenge the very narrative of privilege, loyalty, and betrayal that had dominated headlines for decades. The courtroom was primed for confrontation, and Harry, standing alone yet resolute, was the fulcrum upon which the next seismic shift would occur. But what came next would reveal secrets no one expected, forcing the Duke, the publishers, and even the palace itself into uncharted territory, and no one could predict the fallout that would follow this unprecedented walkout. What happens when one man's courtroom drama becomes a global spectacle in real time? When Prince Harry's legal team walked out mid-trial, the story didn't stay confined to the walls of London's High Court. It exploded across social media, news networks, and tabloids, triggering a frenzy that transformed legal proceedings into a media circus. Every click, every post, every headline amplified the tension, turning the courtroom into a stage where public perception carried as much weight as legal arguments. Within minutes of the walkout, journalists outside the courthouse were already live streaming, their cameras focused on every nuance. Reporters described the scene with breathless intensity, highlighting the Duke's isolated position, his visible frustration, and the sudden absence of counsel. News outlets framed the moment in ways designed to provoke, to captivate, and to drive engagement. Headlines proliferated across the internet. Prince Harry alone in court. Lawyers walk out mid-trial. Royal meltdown? Duke faces media empire solo. And High Court shock, legal team abandons Harry. Each headline carried an emotional hook, a subtle question, and a visual cue that drew viewers in. The speed at which the story traveled was unprecedented. Social media erupted, hashtags trending within minutes, accounts of royal watchers and casual observers blending with commentary from journalists and pundits. Public opinion split instantly. Some lauded Harry's courage, praising him for standing alone against decades of intrusion. Others criticized the decision to go forward without full legal support, questioning judgment and strategy. The global audience was engaged not just in the legal aspects of the case, but in a narrative of drama, loyalty, and betrayal that was impossible to ignore. Television networks were quick to dissect every element. News anchors replayed footage of the courtroom walkout, pausing on Harry's expressions, analyzing his gestures, and speculating about his next move. Panel discussions erupted across channels. Former journalists, legal analysts, and royal commentators debated motives, consequences, and the psychological toll of facing a media conglomerate alone. Each conversation fueled further social media engagement, creating a feedback loop that amplified both tension and intrigue. The visual imagery played a significant role in shaping public perception. Close-ups of Harry's face, tight jaw, furrowed brow, and steely eyes became the defining images of the moment. Photographs capturing the legal team walking toward the exit were circulated endlessly, often accompanied by captions emphasizing drama, betrayal, or shock. Memes and viral posts emerged within hours, blending humor, critique, and commentary, ensuring that the courtroom drama reached audiences far beyond traditional news consumers. But beyond the spectacle, the narrative had real implications. Public opinion began to shape the discourse around journalistic ethics and the role of the media in scrutinizing public figures. Supporters argued that Harry was exposing a long-standing pattern of intrusion, forcing accountability from institutions that had long operated without consequence. Critics countered that the media's role is to report on figures of public interest, and that decades-old stories obtained through legal channels at the time could not reasonably be deemed unlawful today. The tension between perception, morality, and legality became a central point of debate, both inside and outside the courtroom. The frenzy extended internationally. News organizations from the United States, Australia, and across Europe covered the trial live, emphasizing the global fascination with British royalty and media ethics. Social media metrics indicated millions of engagements within the first hour of reporting, with discussion threads exploring every conceivable angle: the legality of past reporting, the implications of a royal lawsuit, the psychological pressure on Harry, and the dynamics of loyalty among his legal team. The story had become a worldwide conversation, blending news, spectacle, and personal drama into a single compelling narrative. Inside the courtroom, the media's influence was palpable. Reporters' cameras were trained on Harry, capturing his every gesture, his every pause, and even the subtle shifts in posture as he recounted decades of alleged intrusion. The presence of cameras and the knowledge that every word and expression would be broadcast globally added another layer of pressure, testing emotional resilience and composure. It became clear that the trial was no longer just a legal matter. It was a performance, a high-stakes drama in which public perception could shape legal outcomes and historical narratives alike. The publishers, aware of the media frenzy, strategically maintained a composed presence. Their calm demeanor in court contrasted sharply with the emotional intensity of Harry's testimony, reinforcing their institutional authority and projecting confidence. Yet even this calculated response was not immune to the power of public perception. Viewers online debated whether the composed approach signaled control or detachment, creating a constant back and forth that extended the drama far beyond the legal arguments. The social media response highlighted an important element of modern trials: narrative control. In previous decades, court proceedings unfolded in relative obscurity, with the public relying on delayed reporting for information. In 2026, every nuance is broadcast, analyzed, and debated in real time. Memes, live commentary, and instant reactions created a parallel trial in the court of public opinion, where perception could influence reputation, future coverage, and even the emotional tenor of courtroom proceedings. Harry's trial became both legal dispute and media event simultaneously, forcing all participants to navigate dual arenas of scrutiny. Public opinion was not monolithic. Some viewed Harry as a hero, standing up to decades of unjust scrutiny and holding media institutions accountable. Others saw vulnerability exploited, suggesting that the absence of his legal team indicated poor preparation or mismanagement. The debate was intense, reflecting broader societal questions about privacy, accountability, and the balance between public interest and personal dignity. Every new article, tweet, or broadcast segment added layers to a story already thick with complexity. The speed of coverage amplified tension. Within hours, leaked commentary, insider speculation, and even unofficial palace responses circulated, further complicating narratives. Experts weighed in on Harry's emotional state, the strategy behind the walkout, and the implications for journalistic ethics. The convergence of global attention, real-time reporting, and social media virality created a pressure cooker environment, intensifying every reaction in court and online. Meanwhile, the courtroom itself became a stage for emotional resonance. Harry's testimony, already emotionally charged, gained new weight in the context of global attention. Each anecdote, each recounting of intrusion, was no longer just a statement to a judge or jury, it was a message to millions watching worldwide. The emotional stakes were magnified, the consequences of perception heightened, and the intensity of human drama pushed to extremes. And yet, the publishers' rebuttals continued with measured precision. They emphasized legality, precedent, and journalistic standards, countering emotional narratives with evidence and documentation. This contrast, Harry's emotional testimony versus the calm institutional defense, created a dynamic that was both compelling and tense, forcing observers to weigh human experience against systemic authority. But the media frenzy did more than amplify tension. It introduced unpredictability. Every misstep, every pause, every minor hesitation was dissected online. Viral clips, commentary threads, and opinion pieces proliferated, ensuring that the trial's narrative extended far beyond the legal parameters. Public scrutiny became a force in itself, influencing perception, shaping debate, and heightening the emotional stakes for everyone involved. The coverage also revealed the fragility of privacy in the modern era. Details of the courtroom, Harry's expressions, and even speculation about the legal strategy were disseminated instantly. The audience became participants, judging, sympathizing, and projecting opinions in real time. The line between court proceedings and public spectacle blurred, creating a new kind of pressure, one where every action had both legal and social consequences. As the frenzy continued, questions lingered. How would Harry maintain composure under global scrutiny? Could the legal arguments withstand the weight of public opinion, which was now as loud and influential as the courtroom itself? Would this media storm overshadow the facts, or would it illuminate truths that had been buried for decades? And just when it seemed the story had reached its peak of visibility, new developments hinted at secrets that had yet to surface: communications, internal strategies, and previously undisclosed evidence that could reshape both legal outcomes and public perception. The media frenzy, already intense, was about to collide with revelations that promised to upend everything the world thought it knew about the trial, the publishers, and even From the outside, the royal family is a carefully curated image, composed, poised, and impervious. But behind palace walls, there are layers of expectation, hierarchy, and intense scrutiny. Every move is measured not only in terms of personal consequences, but also in its impact on the monarchy as an institution. Harry's decision to sue the Daily Mail wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a challenge to a system that prizes discretion and public perception above all else. And while the courtroom drama played out publicly, the palace was undoubtedly watching closely, assessing strategy, optics, and loyalty. Insiders later suggested that the royal household had been quietly monitoring the trial from the start. Advisors and aides tracked every word, every expression, every moment of tension. Some saw Harry's actions as a necessary stand for personal dignity, others as a breach of protocol with potential reputational risk. The balance between supporting a family member and protecting an institution is delicate, often invisible to the public. In Harry's case, that balance was being tested in the most public of arenas. The stakes were deeply personal. Harry's testimony was more than legal, it was a reckoning. He spoke of decades of intrusion into private moments, of grief and family struggles that had been sensationalized for headlines. Each story recalled in court wasn't just a legal claim, it was a memory, an emotional wound reopened under the harsh light of public attention. And as he recounted these experiences, the absence of his legal team amplified the sense of isolation, forcing him to confront both media power and the weight of familial expectation without immediate counsel. Palace pressure is subtle yet profound. It isn't always directives or commands. Often it comes as quiet counsel, implicit expectations, or reminders of tradition. Royals learn early that personal desires are sometimes secondary to the institution's stability. For Harry, taking this trial public meant navigating the complex interplay of personal conviction and familial duty. Each statement, each accusation carried implications not just for him, but for how the monarchy would be perceived in a media-saturated, opinion-driven world. And then there's the irony. Harry, whose life had been shaped by public fascination and media attention, was now taking a stand against the very forces that had defined much of his experience. The media coverage had been relentless for decades, yet now the courtroom became a venue for reclaiming narrative control. The palace, aware of the high stakes, would be monitoring reactions, prepared to intervene indirectly if necessary to protect institutional interests. Every word he spoke was likely evaluated, not only for its legal merit, but for its impact on the monarchy's image. The interplay between palace oversight and personal agency became particularly evident when discussing the timing of the lawsuit. Some advisors reportedly questioned whether this legal action might exacerbate media scrutiny or inflame public opinion. Others understood that Harry's pursuit of privacy was unavoidable. He had long tried private channels to resolve grievances with limited success. The trial, then, represented both a point of no return and a calculated risk, a chance to confront decades of intrusion and reclaim autonomy over his life story. The courtroom itself became a proxy for these hidden pressures. Every glance toward the empty seat of his legal team could be read as a subtle reminder that Harry was navigating not only a legal system, but also a network of expectations, traditions, and pressures from multiple fronts. The publisher's methodical denials were one challenge, but the invisible weight of palace scrutiny was another equally formidable opponent. Harry's testimony illuminated a deep conflict between personal truth and institutional loyalty. He described moments when he felt constrained by public expectation, moments when decisions were dictated more by perception than principle. These reflections revealed the personal cost of life within a system that prioritizes image over emotional reality. And for viewers, the story became as much about the human struggle of a man trying to live authentically as it was about media ethics or legal procedure. Audience engagement emerges naturally here. Have you ever faced pressure from an institution or group whose reputation you were supposed to protect, even at personal cost? How would you act if personal boundaries collided with centuries of tradition? Harry's story resonates because it magnifies this universal struggle on a global scale under the most intense scrutiny imaginable. The trial also shone light on a broader tension: the role of privacy in a modern media-driven world. Royals have long been under scrutiny, their lives documented, analyzed, and dissected, often without consent. Harry's legal action questioned the moral and ethical responsibilities of institutions that report on private lives,